Blaine, whenever you are ready, you can start.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Blaine Rushak, the president of the PhD Project. I'd like to welcome everybody to our first in our webinar series on the state of equity, inclusion, and diversity in business. Before we move into the formal agenda, I just wanted to take a minute to talk a little bit about the PhD Project, who's co-sponsoring today's event. The PhD Project is basically an amazing 26-year history organization that has basically made strides in changing the face of academia by changing diversity in the classroom. It started 26 years ago, and we have gone from under 300 faculty in business schools that were diverse to over 1,600 faculty and students. So we're really proud of the accomplishments. Today we have some amazing panelists on the agenda, including Dr. Ella Washington, who was is a PhD project member. So we're really excited and proud of Dr. Washington's accomplishments. We talked about the accomplishments of the PhD project, and we're really proud of that. And this is the first in a series of many we hope to showcase what our members have done and to point out really important issues that are going on in today's environment. And this has been a very exciting week for many of us. So great timing for the conference. I do also want to just share that if anybody is interested in possibly pursuing their PhD in doing what Dr. Washington did, please go to our phdproject.org site, or if you're interested in seeing how your corporation or association or you personally or anyone you're connected to would like to get more involved in the PhD project and its initiatives, please visit our website or contact any of us at the project. And with no further ado, I would like to turn it over to our co-sponsor, Sasha Thompson, who will be leading our panel today. Sasha, take it away.
Thank you, Blaine. Hello, everyone, and good evening or good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Want to welcome you all to, as Blaine said, the first of many webinars we will be hosting with the PhD Project on diversity, equity, and inclusion at the intersection of business and education. And so I want to start with introducing our panelists for today. Our first panelist is Dr. Ella Washington. Blaine introduced her just now. Dr. Washington is an organizational psychologist who finds inspiration through the intersection of business, diversity, and leadership, and has made this her niche. As a double certified International Coaching Federation and Gallup certified strengths coach, her passion for coaching, facilitating, teaching, and public speaking is unmatched. She has worked one-on-one with mid-level and executive leaders to develop their leadership skills to enhance their organizations. Dr. Washington is a current management faculty member at Georgetown's McDonough School of Business. She is a PhD project faculty member and attended the PhD Project Conference in 2009 prior to starting her doctoral program at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University, where she earned her PhD in organizational behavior. Ella was a Phi Beta Kappa scholar at Spelman College, and where she graduated summa cum laude with a bachelor's degree in psychology. Welcome, Ella.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. It always feels like being among family with the PhD project. So thank y'all for having me.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Michelle Meyer-Shipp. She was named the Major League Baseball's Chief People and Culture Officer by Commissioner Robert D. Manfred in August 2020. What a great time to start a new job. We'll talk about that. In this capacity, Michelle oversees all of MLB's human resources activities, including talent processes and programs, workplace culture, and diversity and inclusion. She also manages all off-field office operations. Michelle joined MLB from Big Four accounting firm KPMG LLP, which actually founded the PhD Project. She's received numerous awards and accolades for her professional accomplishments, including most recently being recognized among the top 100 women of influence by Diversity MBA. She is a graduate of Rutgers University and Seton Hall University School of Law, and she is certified as a senior human resources professional by the Society of Human Resources Management. She's also an employment attorney having practiced for over a decade. Welcome, Michelle. And last but certainly not least is Chris Schmidt. Chris is the chairman and chief executive officer at Moss Adams LLP. Prior to his current role, Chris joined the Orange County, California office of Moss Adams in 1986. In 1991, he was admitted to the partnership. And in 1997, he became the managing partner of the Orange County Practice Office. In 2004, he moved to the firm's national office in Seattle, Washington, and assumed the role of president and chief operating officer for a 5-year term. He was reappointed to a second term in 2009. As chairman and chief executive officer, Chris is responsible for establishing and promoting the firm's strategic plan, including maintaining firm-wide commitments to the highest level of professional practice. Moss Adams has been a PhD project sponsor since 2019. And Jen Wine, the executive director of HR, serves on the PhD projects board. Chris is a member of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and the Washington Society for Certified Public Accountants. He attended California State University Fullerton, where he received his Bachelor's of Arts degree in accounting. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Sasha, and thanks for having me on the panel today. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you all for joining us, and let's get started, all right? So last summer, after the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, corporations, and we all saw this, corporations rushed very quickly to make statements, right? They did pledges for racial justice, social justice causes. And according to Reuters, sorry, I don't know where this cough just came from, about $1.7 billion were pledged. But many of those pledges were focused on external organizations, such as the Equal Justice Initiative, Black Lives Matter Foundation, NAACP, Legal Defense Fund. And at the time, I was working in a diversity and inclusion role within an organization. And what I quickly realized is many of the employees or the sentiments that I was seeing were still externally facing. And a lot of the employees were saying, well, hey, we're seeing these same things internally as well. And what we started to see were a lot of employees saying, well, if Black Lives Matter, well, what about us in our company? What about what we're experiencing internally? And so many of these companies had to take a look in the mirror and, do a little bit more than I think they probably initially intended to do. And we're talking about all of this happening while we're all also dealing in a global pandemic, right? So as we were planning for this, Ella, you actually co-wrote an article talking about the psychological impact of what everyone was dealing with, the mistrust of institutions of authority. What were some of the findings that you came across as you were talking to employees and corporations during this time?
Thanks, Sasha. First, I want to certainly give a shout out to my co-author, Dr. Laura Morgan Roberts, for that article that you're talking about back in June. I think as we were figuring out what would be most helpful for organizations and for leaders in that time, we wrote that article. It came out on June 1st, and that's when we were really starting to see a wave of statements from organizations in a way that we hadn't ever before. Even thinking back to Charlottesville, which was just a few years ago, another example of, the issues of white supremacy coming to a head, many organizations chose not to speak up in that moment. Some did, but it was the small minority. But in this moment, we were seeing a slew of organizations speaking up. And I think it's a great thing. I think that's part of what we wanted to put forth with that article, is to encourage organizations to not be afraid and to boldly speak out against things such as white supremacy, and to encourage not only their internal organization, but those who they touch within their broader sphere of influence to be anti-racist and to bring these conversations to the forefront. And what I'll say is, in thinking back that was 6 months ago. And then thinking about to what happened on January 6th with the insurrection, I did see a lot of organizations kind of learn from past mistakes of maybe taking too long to respond, or not at least reaching out to their internal employees. So I did see a shift, a positive shift in what happened a few weeks ago at the macro level. However, at the micro level, I think there are still some challenges. I don't know that managers have fully embraced the need to create space and have conversations and acknowledge, to your point, that, we're all working from home. And so there's not this line between home and work anymore. I don't think it ever really was. We just kind of imagined it, but now it's in our face. And so even creating space on your teams to allow people to talk about how the impact of what's happening in the world is having impact on them at work, on their teams, and also giving them permission to not have the conversation, right? They don't want to. But at that micro level, I think we're still kind of getting there. And so I think that is some of the lessons learned from June till now.
Mute is not my friend today. All right, so thank you for that. Michelle, I kind of alluded to it earlier in the introduction. You started at Major League Baseball, like in the midst of this, right? And so talk to us a little bit about your first 90 days, because you've been doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work throughout your career, but to start in the middle of a pandemic and on top of, racial unrest within the country. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's funny. I got really lucky in that I stepped into an organization that was really on its game on this topic. I'll be honest with you and tell you, over the summer, when I was considering the job, one of the things that drew me to the role was watching what was happening on the field. During both of these crises, the virus and the racial injustice. Baseball was already well underway in tackling the issue on and off the field. I was very pleased to get there and to see so much great stuff going on. I mean, our players came together and formed what's now known as the Players Alliance, which is a great group of current players and former players working together to, literally advance racial justice, both in partnership with Central Baseball and with the Players Association. That was one thing. The other thing that I found really interesting and positive was that for the first time ever, baseball players, regardless of their race or background, showed up in support of one another on the field on game days. So you saw full teams taking a knee. You saw teams wherein some would kneel, some would not kneel, but they locked arms in unity to show that they supported one another, despite their decision to kneel or stand. So there was a symbolism that the players, were agreeing to bring forward, which was awesome. But then off the field, in addition, there was a lot of what I would call candid conversations happening across the league. In our own central office of Major League Baseball, we were actually hosting something called unfiltered conversations, wherein, to Ella's point, we were giving people the space and creating forum for people to have candid dialogue. I had just transitioned from KPMG, and when I left KPMG, we were also having courageous conversations. And Ella, to your point, it was really important that, in both places, both organizations created a forum and a space wherein those who wanted to engage could engage, and those who were uncomfortable, maybe tired of talking about it, afraid to talk about it, weren't forced to engage. So that was really important. And then for me, being new in the role, it was kind of watching what was happening and then figuring out, where I could fill in some gaps and where I could help us, take even more actions internally to advance racial justice. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's pretty much what it was like for me the first 90 days, exploring what was happening.
And, and I know when we spoke earlier, one of the things that I wrote in my notes that you said was about being surgical, right? And just being very deliberate.
Yes,
about
absolutely. I
being
mean,
done.
you have to really be proactive and strategic in what you're doing and why, right? So for us, we have to think about our employees. in our offices. We have to think about our players on the field. And we also have to think about, our communities that we work in, that we serve, where our baseball parks are. So we had to think about all of those things. And there were actions, strategic and thoughtful actions being taken across all of those stakeholder points. So it was really great to see, and we're still on the path.
Thank you. And Chris, Moss Adams in our conversation, which was really clear to me, was you all didn't just show up in the summer. You've been doing this work for a while as well too. And you talked about starting this back in 2008. So can you talk to us about the journey that you all started then, but what you all had to do over the summer as well, because things were a little bit different?
Sure. Back in 2008, we really started the foundation of our IND programs around gender. We recognized that we needed more women leaders, more women development programs. So we founded a program that's been with us for many years called Forum W, our Forum for Women. And it's been highly, highly successful. That Forum W program, that's part of our fundamental business resource groups, has really served as a role model for our other BRGs that we have in the firm. We've done so many things around training and awareness, and so that was really the start. Everything that we've done at the firm has always tied back to our firm's 5-year strategic plan. So back in 2008, we were focused on people and people development. And as we've evolved our thinking, I can look at our 2020 plan that we actually finished, and it was very focused on inclusiveness and diversity and how we cascade that strategy down and through our firm, where we're moving from the focus on women, of which in our profession, we're hiring approximately 50% women out of school. So just a significant business imperative there, into how we were dealing with race, inequality, and all the other issues. When the events of the summer took place, it really, it was horrific. But I wanted to respond to one thing before I jump there. When Dr. Washington talked about Charlottesville, it was very natural for us and for our leadership to issue a statement denouncing what happened and really addressing white supremacy. And that was shocking to see what happened. And just you bringing up those points, Dr. Washington made me reflect on that time frame and how it turbocharged our firm. And it really put an even brighter light on what we were doing from an IND perspective. When the events took place in the summertime, it was linked to more of the programs that we had already been building out around IND. We issue annual reports. Our Moss Adams Foundation is sponsoring and been involved now with the PhD program since 2019. We issue and are accountable around all of our IND statistics. We have our annual report that we post out online, and really the shift was to focus on awareness, action, and accountability. And it really started with our board having those candid conversations that were also connected into many one-on-ones I was having with our Black BRG members and leaders around what they were thinking and feeling, and how we take that and move it into the firm. Because it was very, very uncomfortable for myself as a 62-year-old white male who needed help and coaching from our team members on how to deal with those uncomfortable conversations. And it was very educational for many of our leaders. And it's a journey, but it all tracks back to the things that leadership decided to do way back in 2008, connected to our women's program, and been really pleased with the progress that we're making. But we're on the path. It's just an evolutionary thought process, and you just can't do enough to be aware of all the things that are going on right now, outside and then internally inside the firm.
Thank you. You know, it's interesting. As I'm listening to you all and the conversations we've, had before, what I'm hearing is that the work that you all have done is going beyond the surface, right? It's going beyond the checkbox activities that I call them, right? Like, oh, yes, we've done that. We're, pat ourselves on the back. It's really looking at the levels, right? You're talking about the board, you're talking about leaders, you're talking about your constituents, you're talking about, the communities that you touch, right? And so it goes beyond just kind of like, what looks good for PR, right? What looks good for a brochure. It really is addressing some of the systemic challenges. And so Ella, talk to me about, in your consulting, you do some auditing. So talk to us a little bit about that and what you're seeing around structural and cultural changes.
Absolutely. Well, first I want to acknowledge the great things that Michelle and Chris shared. Chris, what really stuck out to me around your comments was the example of the journey, right? And how it was unique to your organization and how you showed up in these different challenging moments. And that's connected with what I hear from a lot of leaders. When I reflect back on this summer, the two questions I was most often asked from leaders that were engaging in, our consulting and thinking about DEI was one, where are we on the journey? Where are we on the maturity model? And then two, directly after, how do we compare to other people? So, and those are great questions. And they're tough questions often, especially when you're thinking about comparing to other organizations, because it's such a personal journey. While we can learn from best practices in other organizations, there is no, unfortunately, one size fits all approach to DEI. And that's really tough for people to really wrap their minds around. In thinking back to that first question, kind of where are we on the journey? In order to answer that question, you have to first look internally and do an audit of some sort, whether you use an external person or use your internal teams. I love the James Baldwin quote, and I think it really speaks to what organizations have to think about. He said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And for that quote, to me, it really highlights the need that we have to look under the hood. We can't be afraid to kind of face what's happening in our organizations, to talk about those uncomfortable things or those things that maybe we've always done it this way and never challenged it. And so, in order to move forward in a way that's not perfunctory, in a way that goes beyond external donations, which are great, but there are many internal things that we have to face in order to truly see cultural shifts that we're looking for.
And this mute button. And actually, there's a question that came in around that audit process. How do you get leadership and the board to buy in to do an audit of representation of pay, right? Or representation or whatever that audit is? How do you get that buy-in?
I'd love for Michelle and Chris to weigh in on this from their positions of leadership. I'm happy to share some things that have worked in other organizations. I would say the bottom line across the board, there is both a moral imperative and a business imperative. And I know, my colleagues, we debate this all the time. What's more important, the moral case for diversity and inclusion or the business case? But I think, quite frankly, it's both. And oftentimes, if you have leadership teams that don't quite understand why, connecting it to the business case and the outcomes of the organization is really important. But would love Michelle and Chris to also weigh in there.
It's funny. I agree with you completely. I'd add that, over the years, I've worked at organizations that are very risk averse. So I find there that, kind of giving them the risk quotient on that, Lisa, to your question, is what really, really gets them listening. It's like, okay, here is the risk if we don't address these issues. If we don't, it's everything that you said. It's explaining the business case, the moral imperative, and all of that. But on top of that, I'm like, and oh, by the way, if we don't do this, here are the risks that we expose our organization to, our leaders to, et cetera, and then showing them examples of what that looks like. headline news stories where companies got it wrong and things of that nature, that usually gets them. And it's kind of one of those things where you have to meet people where they're at. Some people are bought in the minute you put forth the moral imperative. Some people are bought in by the business imperative. Most people get the risk imperative, even if they are not really buying in on the first two. So I always go with it with showing them all three, because I know that at least one of those is going to resonate with someone around that table.
Leading an
Chris.
accounting consulting firm, any meeting that we have will move from the morality discussion into ultimately a business discussion, and then what do we want to measure? They immediately want to drive to a metric, and we're all for metrics. It could be a risk metric, a revenue metric, whatever the drivers are. We all have multiple different drivers in everything that we do. What we try to do is walk back that accounting and auditing and try to get more awareness built in the issues that we're trying to tackle. At a fundamental level, we want to look like the communities that we're located in. We want our workforce, our partners, our team members to look like those communities. And that is, it could be a moral imperative, it could be a business imperative. It's what's right. And those are the discussions that we have at a board level, at a leader level. And we're also listening very closely with what's percolating up from our business resource groups and our team members. There's a lot of listening, and our plans are nowhere near 100% perfect. They're a work in process. And what Ella and Michelle both said resonate with me is in many, many of our meetings, we've had those discussions. And we're ready to set a metric when we feel like we have a realistic metric that we can drive to and strive for. And that's, I think, a really important part of auditing, as you termed that.
And while the spotlight is on you, Chris, I'm gonna continue because I want to pivot into, we actually talked about this a little bit in our pre-meeting, but I think it ties in, nicely to this, because you talked about working with, the BRGs in your company and talking to your Black partners and associates there. But you took a really bold step as we're talking about culture change and shift. You took a very bold step and issued a statement. And in part, it reads, "We recognize racial injustice is all around us and the roots go deep. Moss Adams is committed to rooting out this injustice where we can. The challenge and the opportunity is to identify and understand our own bias, seek diverse guidance and input, take concrete actions, and hold ourselves accountable." Not too many companies were that bold, right? I know just, and some of the work that I do now, many companies don't want to talk about racial injustice, right? They want to make it like peaches and cream. They want to, let's soften this up a bit. Let's be nice about this. Let's be as inclusive as we can about our language. But that's, a very bold statement. And so talk to us a little bit about why this was important to you to make this statement.
At a fundamental level, it's tone at the top. And that sounds like such a cliche term to use for so many different things. But I can say personally that I was rattled when the events that took place during the summer, cascaded on me as a leader, and immediately initiated multiple conversations with different leaders in the firm of color, trying to understand better how we should respond as a firm. And that statement that you read, it's posted out on our external website, but we went a step further in our strategic planning for our 2025 plan, where we actually have a strategy to become an anti-racist firm. So we've, in 6 months, evolved from that statement where we're saying, what we believe in and what we're going to do, to actually putting a measure out for 3,600 people so that they can see how serious we are about rooting out those things at Moss Adams, where many of our partners and team members will say, I'm a good person, so therefore I'm not a racist person. And those are the learnings that we've really explored, built out, and continue to iterate on. Because I hear that a lot. And that's the progression from that statement to where we're headed from a firm perspective. And we're very, very focused on this. We see it as a business issue, a moral issue, like we talked about 5 minutes ago. And we're going to stay after it because we feel like it is what we need to do at Moss Adams, what we need to do at the firm and for the profession.
Thank you. And Michelle, you know, MLB actually made an announcement not too long ago, right? That some folks would say, you know, was long overdue. But I think it, again, is a bold statement about the Negro League. And talk to us a little bit about, you know, that decision and some of the other things that you all are doing that may not be as visible.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I walked right into that. You know, it was that was well underway, you know, and I'm not taking any credit for that. And I'm really proud of our leaders for doing their due diligence on that. It kind of goes back to what Chris was talking about. You know, when leaders make the commitment, you know, to right injustices and to advance equity. And we said this earlier, you know, you have to be surgical and deliberate about the actions you're going to take. So for us at baseball, our focus is around kind of three key areas. And it's really interesting. Each of them is kind of their own body of work, right? So I think some of you touched on this earlier, but you know, our first focus area is people. So we're focused on our people. We're focused on making sure that we have diverse representation and that we're doing everything in our power to advance, retain, and grow that talent, okay, in a very deliberate way. So that's kind of our people body of work. And we have a host of targeted programs, policies, and initiatives to advance that forward that predate me. And I'm really honored and excited to be able to take those programs and make sure that we're doing everything in our power to make sure they're impactful and that they're working. Our culture pillar really speaks to exactly what Chris was just talking about. That's around kind of that commitment to creating that environment of inclusion, equity, where everyone can thrive, grow, and be their fullest selves. But to Chris's point, and I love, Chris, that you said this, I mean, the tone must be set from the top because leaders role model the behavior you want others to see, and it catches on like wildfire. But the other thing I've realized over the years is, you know, everyone doesn't know how to lead inclusively. And everyone's not comfortable being uncomfortable, having courageous conversations. So we have to teach people how to do that. We have to create spaces for them to do that. So in our culture pillar, there's a whole body of work around inclusive leadership education. You know, I actually have something right now that we created at baseball called Leaders Bench. And it's a newsletter that we put out, and it gives leaders kind of tips and tools for navigating these challenging times. We just did one around the insurrection. You know, we did one around Election Day. We've done one around the pandemic, you know, and being thoughtful about how the pandemic is impacting people depending on their home situation. So, you know, the culture pillar is key, and there's targeted initiatives there. And then, you know, looping into the Negro League decision, our community pillar is really focused on us being thoughtful about what we're going to do to advance and support racial equity in our communities where we work and live with our players on the field, et cetera. And the Negro League decision was one of those big decisions, again, predates me. And very recently with the insurrection, we actually stopped all of our PAC contributions because we now want to look at our policy, reassess our policy to ensure that, you know, we are not supporting any efforts in which systemic racism is built in. So we are looking at all of those pillars all at the same time in a very deliberate and surgical way to debunk, you know, all of these issues. But Chris, you know, I think you said it really well. I mean, the bottom line is this has to be leader-led and business-owned. I don't own it. My HR folks don't own it. My DEI team doesn't own it. It takes a village. And our leaders make the decisions and ultimately call the shots. So they have to be in the game, on the field, and they have to completely understand what it means to be an inclusive leader in every true sense.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And it's funny that you kind of led with that, because the question that came up, I'm pivoting off of our script, so we're just going to be flexible. But it's talking about, how do we make sure that everyone in the decision-making room is aligned when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion? And Ella, I'm gonna actually throw that out to you, because, in my consulting work, that's probably the biggest question. Like, how are we even defining diversity as a company? How are we defining equity? How are we defining inclusion? Are we talking about belonging? Like, what terms are we even using here? And even if it's a global company, that definition of diversity is just diverse, right? And so, I suggest, like, as a company, you come up with your own definition, because then everyone is kind of bought in. But talk to us a little bit about, what you're seeing and how to make sure leaders are all kind of on the same page.
So I'll start with building off of what Michelle talked about as far as being leader-led and business-owned. I see that as, one of the number one problems that organizations are struggling with. They may be very committed to the DEI journey, but they struggle with activating at the local levels, at the business levels, what that means beyond HR, what that means beyond Michelle's job or, someone else in HR. And why they often struggle with it is because there's no clear vision. I wrote down game plan, connecting with Michelle's analogy there. But like with anything, if you don't have a game plan, if you don't have a vision, you can't know where you're going. And I don't mean, vision in terms of this is important to us. Far too often I see leadership teams all nod their head yes, saying, oh yes, this is an important priority for us. We believe in it. We're bought in on the moral case, the business case, what have you. But they don't get granular in terms of how they want to show up in the world, how they want to show up in the space. And by that, I mean, for example, we can't all be Ben and Jerry's. I love Ben and Jerry's, and I think what they're doing is phenomenal in the social justice space, but that's part of their core mission. If you go back to the beginning of the organization, they've always been on the side of speaking out around social justice. So, as I said earlier, because there's no one size fits all approach, it's not fair for us to just wake up one day and say, we're starting our D&I journey and we're going to be Ben and Jerry's. And maybe that doesn't work for our business. Maybe that doesn't work for our shareholders. And maybe we can't start there. Maybe we have to do, as Michelle said, kind of focus on our employees first, right? And so even in understanding how you want to show up in this space, what's important to you, I think that's really important. And when you don't do that, what happens down the line, again, we're all in the room saying this is important, at the top of the year or conversations right after George Floyd's murder. But what happens in 6 months when the economy is still struggling? What happens when, we lose the leader that has been spearheading these efforts? What happens when we actually have to make trade-offs or we face some roadblocks that aren't so comfortable? And if we're not on the same page about what the vision is and how we want to show up, we can't move past those roadblocks. And that is, I think, what limits us from being able to see these efforts really business owned because of a lack of vision.
Sasha, can I jump in on that?
No, yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yes.
I wanted to tag on to some of the things that Ella just said.
Sure.
We had that whole business, leader-led, business-owned. What we did is went through multiple learning sessions with our leader group, our board. We got to a point where we had many uncomfortable conversations, but we asked our our IND advisory board that's made up of multiple BRG leaders to help us with bold action steps that we could weave through the firm. So we're listening to the team from the bottom, we're helping drive the message from the top. And we also made being an anti-racist firm a goal of our board for the next 18 months. And we're not going to be done in 18 months, but every board meeting that we have will be having discussion, dialogue, and feedback around these action items that our I&D board has recommended back to us.
Mhm.
That there's multiple connection points, and then there's the communication piece that has to get systematically rolled out so people can decide when they're, at what point am I going to jump in on the journey? Where am I good, that my awareness is such that I feel comfortable having those conversations, because everybody's at a different place. But we as a leader group have we have that leadership responsibility to move this forward. And that's where we feel like we'll make progress faster at the firm, you know, at all levels, with that board accountability, the communication, and the action items, and the responsibility that's coming up from our other team members.
Yeah, Sasha, I got to jump in on this. This
Yep.
is great. I love what Chris and Ella both just said, and I kind of want to tie it together and put a bow on it, because I just went through this exercise, and I love, Chris, what you're doing with that approach. I think that's so perfect. You know, it's funny, in my new role, you know, I realized right away, I kind of went on a listening tour of sorts. And I met with and talked to, kind of, Ella, going back to your point about the audit, you know, this was my audit, was my listening tour, right? And talked to leaders across the central office, talked to leaders across our 30 teams, you know, tried to understand what was going on. And what happens when you do that is you start to see themes emerge. And some of the themes that emerged were things like, hey, Michelle, you know what? We don't have a common understanding of what D, E, and I really mean. I had several people tell me that, like from the most junior person to like some of our team owners, right? I had people say to me, you know, to Ella, to your point, like, well, what actually is the mission here? So I realized that, you know, we have all these things going on, but we don't have, you know, a North Star. We don't have clarity. So one of the very first things that I did was, you know, drafted based on their feedback, not based on my own personal, you know, perspective, but, you know, based on what the organization is telling me, based on what our leaders are telling me, this sounds like it might be the direction they want. This sounds like the North Star, you know, and then I had to socialize that and quickly got buy-in on that. And people were so grateful to now have a North Star. And then from there, it really was, okay, you know what are the actions we're going to take? What are the things we're going to agree to? So it's, you know, vision, mission, and strategy. So now we have a strategy, we have a framework, and it really does help with that accountability. And again, I can't just echo enough, you know, Chris, I think, you know, that whole leadership piece, it's not going to go anywhere if you don't have your leaders engaged and committed. So kudos on that.
That's actually a perfect segue into my next question around accountability. So on, I believe it was earlier this week, I read a piece on CNN where the presidents of some of the HBCUs were hearing the challenges that were happening amongst some big tech companies, and basically saying, you know, you're trying to recruit our talent, but we're seeing that they're not having a good experience there. So why should we send our talent to you? Which I think is a level of accountability that we haven't seen before, right? I think, you know, these companies think we're a big name. People want to come work here for us, regardless of how we treat our talent. And so I'm starting to see this pushback in ways, again, that we haven't seen. Employees are starting to push back, and now universities. And so, Chris, when we were talking, you know, you talked about the feedback that your Black employees were giving you and the accountability. And so the quote I have was like, you know, show me the money, right? We talked about that. So talk to us a bit about that process and working with your employees, excuse me, and making sure that you're not just recruiting, but you're doing what you need to do to retain as well.
Exactly. The feedback that we were getting is, once we bring someone in, if we bring a Black team member in, how are we ensuring that that team member is sponsored, has right allies, is getting coached and mentored and developed, and we're watching and looking at our metrics and stepping back and really thinking more holistically about sponsorships. Our Black team members would love for us tomorrow to quadruple the number of Black hires that we have in the firm. My conversation back to them is, please help us work with the PhD project, our Ignite scholarships, the various things that we have to grow the pipeline. And that's the pipeline of qualified individuals, and also help us with learning and listening so that we do a better job of retaining those team members. And that goes back to the business question that we talked about 20 minutes ago. I love being in a room with team members who are providing feedback. I use that as an opportunity to lay out the leadership business issues that we're faced with, not as an excuse, but to pull them along that conversation so that they understand what we're dealing with from a firm perspective as we take care of our clients and run our business. And a lot of it is just listening, not being offended by what people are saying, as a leader, but asking them, imploring them to please help us come up with better things that we can do to retain, develop, grow, and build these leaders that are going to take us into the future, into that firm that we want to be. And the conversations have been great. A lot of them are young. If you're dealing with a 1, 2, 3 year person and they're confident enough to provide you feedback in an email, like I've received, I've been so impressed. I've responded to every single email that's come to me from our team members around this. And sometimes I'm up late at night, but I want them to know that they're being listened to. And just taking that information and being able to come up with action items has really been part of that as it relates to the HSBU schools, as well as all the other places that we recruit, and the true focus on retention and development.
And Ella, you wear multiple hats, right? And so one of them is as a professor, right? And part of the mission, or why the PhD project was created, was just a thought process of, if there's more diversity in the classroom as far as the professors, then ultimately you'll start to see more diversity in business schools, undergraduate and beyond. And that's actually how I got connected with the PhD project some years ago. And so what role can professors, academics play, especially if they are in a seat where they're talking to these corporations, right? You're talking to them, you're consulting with them, but you're also seeing the problems and the challenges. And so in your unique space, talk to me about what you would tell your students to do as they're looking for their opportunity in corporate America.
Absolutely. I think that business schools and other places of education have a really big part in educating the leaders of tomorrow, right? We always say that, but what does that actually mean? Well, we should be looking at what organizations are struggling with right now. For example, inclusive leadership. Michelle so eloquently put that people don't just wake up and know how to be an inclusive leader. So we have to teach them. And so what happens is, if that conversation that I'm having with, the 70-year-old CEO, and he's saying, this is the first time that I've, talked to my team about race. What happens if we have that conversation with the 20-year-old that's in our classrooms, or the 28-year-old in our MBA classrooms? Having those uncomfortable conversations earlier, kind of exposing our leaders of tomorrow with the realities of what it's like to lead a team, is important. And I see that as, one of our biggest contributions in building this pipeline that we talk about. It's not just about, butts and seats. It's about creating competencies around an inclusive leadership that people can practice. Because as we've said many times over, it's a journey. So you don't just wake up one day and become a leader, and certainly not an inclusive leader. And so it's something you'll always be working on throughout your life. So from an educational perspective, I think having those conversations, developing those inclusive competencies early on is really impactful. And furthermore, what I've noticed from my MBA students is that many times they've been wanting to have this conversation, but in their workplaces, they didn't feel comfortable or it wasn't welcomed. And so in the classroom, it actually is a more psychologically safe environment to have these conversations amongst peers, particularly if the professor makes it their business to make a psychologically safe environment. So there's part of that, classroom culture that has to be established. But I've been amazed at the depth of conversations that my students want to have on these topics and didn't feel like they could have in their workspaces without being, ridiculed in some way or dismissed or even looked at differently based on their views. So I think there's a beautiful opportunity in that safe space that education can create.
Thank you. I want to be mindful of the time. We have a couple of questions that popped up in the Q&A that I want us to see if we can tackle before we get to our final thoughts. So I'll kind of sum this up. The first one up to, I'll go with this one. When there are issues around diversity and inclusion, but they also are tied to politics, right? How do you make a decision on which statements, can be made and which ones you should back away off from? Michelle, I saw you come off of mute, so looks like you have an answer for that one.
Been dealing with this one for a while. So you have to tie everything back to your core values. If you tie it back to your values, you can usually find a clear and easy link. The other thing is that, leaders have to recognize that what may look like, a clearly just political thing might have far-reaching ramifications and implications from a diversity standpoint. So for example, the insurrection was the insurrection, but what came from that were lots of discussions around double standards, and what happened during the Black Lives Matter, anticipation of a protest versus what happened here. So race clearly was a part of this, and it raised questions and concerns. So leaders had to address it. So I think you have to go back and think about your values. And also, I think you have to make it really clear that your statements are tied to mutual respect and dignity and humanity, more so than anything else. I mean, we were very, very thoughtful in our own message at baseball around the events of January 6th. And we tied it back to our values. We tied it back to dignity and respect, and the reinforcing statement that we don't condone violence of any sort. And that helped us get there. But over the years, through all of the horrible things that have happened, that's always the path that I've taken to kind of navigate those conversations. It's like, this is not a political conversation. This is a conversation about dignity and respect and humanity.
Michelle, just to add on, I think you hit it spot on. It is all about values. One thing I might add is trying to understand where that person is coming from on the political spectrum. We try not to get too far right or too far left, because the extremism gets so much airtime, and there's so much in the middle where there's a common good that connects to goals. And I'm not dismissing the horrible events that took place on January 6th. And I'm glad to see the law doing their part. But we really, that understanding where someone is coming from is just so important when that subtle political undertone moves through. And that's really what we try to do. Then come right back to, as Michelle said, come back to our values, what we're trying to do from an anti-racism perspective. Then it brings people right back. If they can't accept what we're trying to do from a firm perspective, then they probably shouldn't be at the firm. Big statement, but that's how we're thinking.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more with what was shared already. And what I would just add is that, oftentimes it feels like these conversations don't have a place in the workplace, But kind of as we started off today talking about, there is not this barrier between work and personal anymore, the way that we maybe grew up thinking there would be or should be, right? And so instead of running from these uncomfortable conversations and thinking they don't have an impact on the employee experience, if we're really saying we want employees to bring their whole self to work, that's what this means, right? My whole self was watching, CNN till whatever time last night when the insurrection happened. So that's going to have an impact on my workday, right? And so for us not to talk about it is a detriment to us as an organization, as a team, particularly. And I think it also is a missed opportunity for us to connect deeper with the work that we do. So for example, conversation, today I led a focus group conversation with the organization, creating space for their employees to just talk about the events over the past 3 weeks, how they're feeling. And at first the conversation was very, personal about their opinions and, how they've been feeling, but it quickly connected to how it has an impact on the work that they're doing and the customers they engage with. With this particular organization, they engage with their customers on an online platform that's often anonymous, and they get a lot of racial slurs, for example. And so employees were able to talk about how it's tough to be a good customer service representative under those circumstances, and how it was really triggering for them to come to work the next day and have to interface with customers after the insurrection. So though it might start as, feeling like it's a political conversation, I guarantee you, whether it's how you deal with your customers, how you engage with your board, as Chris talked about earlier, or even how your employees team together, there is an impact on the work that has to be done by the organization. And so if managers can kind of be in tune with that and bring that to the forefront, it will help guide the conversation.
Thank you. So we are almost at time. And so I know there are tons of questions that are coming in, and apologize that we can't get to them all, which means we probably need to continue this conversation at another time, but this is great. But I want us to end with your final thoughts, right? So my question to all three of you is, what one or two things do you want people to walk away knowing about this work and about kind of continuing for the next 6 months, right? So we'll go to Michelle, Chris, and then Ella will wrap us up.
Okay, that's cool. So I'll say a couple of quick things. One is it's a journey, as we discussed. Two is every single one of us plays a role in this work. And I would ask everyone to do two things. One, well, actually three things. Be self-aware of your own blind spots. Two, listen to understand, not listen to respond. And three, engage in meaningful actions to help your organization, your communities, et cetera, advance the cause.
Thank you.
I think from my perspective, really well said, Michelle. Excellent. Increase your level of awareness across the broad spectrum of things. Don't be uncomfortable to talk about Black Lives Matter, because if Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. And we've tackled that at the firm. And cut yourself some slack. Give yourself grace that this is a journey, and engage your friends and family and colleagues in conversation. That's so impactful, and it just moves the discussion along.
Thanks.
I would echo those sentiments and add, embrace empathy. So embracing, giving yourself some grace, but also leading with empathy. We all have lived experiences. We all have a story, and we all kind of bring certain things to the workplace. And so the more that we can be empathetic and really seek to connect with each other, I think the further we'll get on this journey. And finally, what comes to mind for me is one of my favorite African proverbs is that when you pray, move your feet. And I think it really speaks to, we have this hope of the work that we're doing, while we're doing this work, and pray if you're spiritual, but we have this collective hope. We want things to get better, but we can't be afraid to move our feet in order to get those things to come to fruition.
Thank you. And I think, after listening to you all and getting a better sense of kind of what's happening in this space, the one thing that I always want to end my conversations with is understanding the importance of self-care. Because again, this work is tough. This work is grueling sometimes, but we definitely need to make sure that we take care of ourselves. It's kind of like, on the airplane, you got to take your oxygen before you feed others. So definitely the self-care. So thank you all for this. This has been absolutely amazing. Like I said, the Q&A is going, the chat's going. I think people are really excited about this. PhD project will be, and the equity equation will continue these conversations for the next couple of months. And so please follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram and whatever other social media things are out there right now. And we'll make sure that we let you know the next topics and our panelists. And thank you all for participating, and have a blessed evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.